Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Report on Palestine, Israel. I'm Mark Hage. What do we know about Jeffrey Epstein's ties to the State of Israel? How did this convicted sex offender, for so many years, leverage his political and financial network to advance Israel's geopolitical agenda? Well, that's the subject of our first report. Journalist Ken Hurton of the podcast The Take interviews Craig McIver, international human rights lawyer and a 30-year employee of the United Nations. What Mr. McIver has to tell us reveals why the Epstein-Israel connection is one of the most underreported aspects of the Epstein scandal, and it also reveals how power works globally. After that report, we'll feature a recording by Rimbiana, a Palestinian artist. She'll be singing a song, "We Are Here for Palestine." And finally, on this edition, we will introduce you to Stephen Kaposh. Mr. Kaposh is an 88-year-old survivor of the Nazi Holocaust from Hungary. At the age of 7, with his parents, he escaped to avoid the Nazi death machine. They survived the war, but 15 members of his family were murdered. Mr. Kaposh is one of the most vocal pro-Palestinian advocates in the Jewish Holocaust survivor community. In this interview with Mehdi Hassan of Zeteo, he talks about his life growing up under the Nazi regime, what he learned during that period, how he became an advocate for the Palestinian cause, and why he will never abandon the Palestinian struggle for liberation. Here now, though, is Ken Hurton of the podcast The Take.
Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, Jeffrey Epstein was trying to reshape the Middle East.
All the people that fell into his web, they were all essentially commodities to him, traded for the advantage of one single cause, which is Israel.
How a convicted sex offender leveraged his money and contacts to advance Israel's agenda and his own. I'm Kevin Hurton, and this is The Take. Today's episode zooms in on an overlooked part of the Epstein files. We're looking at how he worked as a middleman, and sometimes almost like a diplomat, securing connections and businesses between powerful players. Different governments, different interests. But before we continue, tell us what angle of this monumental affair you think we should look at next. We're always looking for your input. If you enjoyed this perspective, don't forget to rate the show 5 stars. It helps tremendously.
Well, I'm Craig McIver. I'm an international human rights lawyer and analyst, served for over 3 decades at the United Nations, and stepped down from my post at the UN headquarters in New York in October of 2023. And we are speaking from New York.
Okay, so Craig, thank you for coming on The Take, and it's really great to have you on the show today. But before we drill down on Epstein and Israel specifically, I did want to introduce you a bit to our audience. So can you just tell me a little bit about the work that you did for the UN?
Sure. Well, I spent more than 3 decades at the United Nations with postings and missions in countries around the globe, including, by the way, in Palestine, where I undertook several human rights missions. But my final post before stepping down in October of 2023 was as director of the Human Rights Office at United Nations headquarters in New York.
And you made headlines on October 28th, 2023, and that was just 3 weeks into Israel's genocide on Gaza, when you wrote a resignation letter to the UN High Commission for Human Rights. In it, you said the United Nations was failing in its duty to prevent the genocide. I would say that 3 years later, that counts as prescient. So when we look back, when future generations look back on all of the ways that the UN failed the Palestinians during this period, will it be because it was powerless to oppose Israel or simply chose not to?
Well, I think it's the latter. There are periods in the UN's history, particularly in the 1960s and 70s and into the 1980s, where the UN consistently took a very principled stand on Palestine based upon international law, on international human rights. But beginning with the start of the Oslo process in the early 1990s, that began to shift in the UN, where notions of political expediency began to trump international norms and standards about what was happening in Palestine. And there was a lot of pressure. I was there during those years to sort of, tone down critique of the Israeli regime, even during its worst periods of atrocity, and to simply defer to the peace process, defer to the Americans and the Israelis effectively. And that downward spiral continued, I think, to weaken the response of the United Nations to the situation in Palestine, leading, I think, ultimately to the genocide.
Yeah. Okay. So here's where I want to introduce to this story the figure of Jeffrey Epstein, the now deceased financier and convicted sex offender. Now, he's been dead since 2019, but the Epstein story is very much alive, as you know. The Epstein files have been dominating the news cycle all over the world, especially in the wake of this latest drop of 3 million documents by the U.S. Department of Justice. And Craig, the extent of Jeffrey Epstein's reach in all corners of elite circles is just stunning. I mean, we're talking higher education, finance, royalty, international relations. So among the thousands of names mentioned in the files, there's two that had an outsized role, I would say, in shaping the past and the current contours of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we're talking about Mona Yule and Terje Ruud Larsen. Tell us who they are and what the files reveal about their connection to Epstein.
Yeah. Well, I think what the files reveal is that Epstein clearly had his eye on the United Nations for quite some time. There's one exchange between Epstein and Steve Bannon where he's urging Steve Bannon to come to New York for the United Nations General Assembly. And he refers to the UN General Assembly as the Super Bowl, underscoring the importance of that annual UN gathering for his own networking goals as well. The documents also revealed, by the way, that Epstein had somehow obtained confidential internal documents from the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in his communications. We know that one president of the UN General Assembly, Miroslav Lajčák, who's the former president of the GA, but also a former Slovak foreign minister, he was in regular correspondence with Jeffrey Epstein, including while he was serving at the UN those years. He ultimately was compelled to resign out of a scandal around the Epstein releases.
Yeah.
But as you say, the most important UN revelation so far in the Epstein files relates to Mona Yule and Terje Ruud Larsen.
I talked to both Israeli negotiators and Palestinian negotiators. And eventually, I came to the understanding that the way it was organized in Washington couldn't possibly succeed.
This is a Norwegian husband and wife team who were the architects of the, I think I can say it, disastrous Oslo process. And it's important because their close relations to Epstein and his role as kind of an Israeli asset is important because history shows that Oslo was effectively a diplomatic smokescreen.
The Oslo Accords were a series of agreements signed between 1993 and 1999 with a goal that aimed to see Israel withdraw from the territories it occupied. And so most Palestinians believe that the Accords would create an independent Palestinian state in the occupied territories alongside Israel. But that never happened.
It sidestepped international law. It devastated Palestinian rights for 3 decades. It consolidated Israel's unlawful position in Palestine. And these main architects of Oslo, Larsen and Yule, they're revealed in the files as having very close personal long-term relations with Epstein. Larsen took substantial personal loans from Epstein, and the children of Larsen and Yule were reportedly left $10 million in Epstein's will.
That's unbelievable.
Then you have...
And Larsen, just to interrupt, Larsen was briefly your boss at one point at the UN.
He was during my posting for 2 years in the 1990s in Gaza. He was the UN Special Coordinator, the senior envoy for Israel and Palestine. I worked briefly under his supervision there. And then he later left and headed the International Peace Institute, which is a think tank across the street from the UN and very much affiliated with the UN, where these files also suggest that he was facilitating internships for allegedly unqualified young women from Eastern Europe, and in at least some of the cases, sharing their photos with Epstein in personal communications. So remember, Larsen was the UN's chief envoy for the Middle East, what was called UNSCO in those days. And he was later forced to step down from the Peace Institute because of his dealings with Epstein. But even after Oslo, he was also implicated in efforts to try to advance Trump's so-called Abraham Accords ruse, which I think viewers will know is basically a U.S.-Israel scheme to erase the Palestinian issue from regional and global politics and consolidate the normalization of Israel. And all of this raises a lot of eyebrows at the UN, because there's this sense that Larson, and in fact all of his successors as UN envoys at UNSCO, they were perceived as being too close to the Israeli regime to the detriment of the Palestinians. And all of them, from Larson on, consistently prioritized Israel regime sensibilities over international law and the human rights of the Palestinians. And that was very frustrating to UN human rights officials, for example, with whom UNSCO has often been in conflict. And now just, on this point, equally shockingly, Larson's most recent successor at UNSCO, Nikolay Mladenov, has even agreed to serve on Trump's lawless colonial so-called Board of Peace, which itself, I think, is a direct affront to the Palestinian people.
I saw that. Yeah. Norway did suspend Mona Yule as Norway's ambassador to Jordan and Iraq over Ambassador Mona Yule's contacts with Jeffrey Epstein. So there was some accountability there.
They did.
So let's examine Epstein's own connections with the Israelis. There have been, theories swirling around for years that he was an intelligence asset, possibly working for the Russians or Mossad. You don't go that far, but you do describe him as a Mossad adjacent Israeli regime operative. What do you mean by that?
Well, we know he was at least an asset of the Mossad. It seems to me the evidence that's been laid out now is beyond question. Whether or not he was on the employee rolls of Mossad, if any such thing exists, that's a question we don't have an answer to. But the documents, releases, and investigations, they revealed that he operated principally as an intermediary for Israeli interests. And that he had very privileged and very intimate connections to Israeli politicians, especially Ehud Barak, the former prime minister, but also Israeli spies like Yoni Koren, who frequently stayed for weeks at a time in Epstein's New York apartment, as well as his close relationship and engagement with major collaborators in Israel's military and intelligence infrastructure, like Palantir, for example.
He explained what Palantir was to Ehud Barak. We'll get to him in a second, but
Yes, he did. And neither one of them seemed to be able to spell any of the names involved, including Palantir.
Palantir?
Yes.
How you write Thiel? Thiellly?
Thiel.
Lly?
No. Thiell.
Okay.
So he thought that Peter would put you on the board of Palantir. Peter Thiel is one of the best.
So that's interesting, but that became an absolutely key contact over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Ehud Barak. He was Israel's prime minister from 1999 to 2001. Then he was defense minister from 2007 to 2013. What have we learned about his relationship with Epstein?
Well, it was close, it was intimate, it was long-standing. Remember, Ehud Barak was not just the former prime minister, he was the former minister of defense, as you say, head of military intelligence, very closely connected with Israeli intelligence. And he was one of Epstein's closest associates. He met with Epstein dozens of times, long after, by the way, Epstein's 2008 sex crimes conviction. He was often on his private jet, on his island, and his various properties. They were actually partners in security tech startups. Epstein helped Barak with a range of business ventures, ranging from oil deals to an Israeli drone company. He was even involved, by the way, in Barak's political comeback against Netanyahu in 2019. And with Barak, he helped Israel facilitate agreements with other countries trying to build Israel's profile. So an agreement with Cote d'Ivoire for Israeli surveillance and tech, an agreement with the Mongolian government to promote Israeli military equipment and surveillance tech, even to facilitating communications between Barak and Putin to advance Israel's goals in the Syrian war.
That's incredible. Just pause there.
Yeah.
Epstein is facilitating a meeting between a former Israeli prime minister and the president of Russia. He has that power.
He has that power, and he had that role very clearly. He was sort of an unofficial ambassador who could use this network that they had created together to be kind of a front man, an advance man for the Israeli regime, and that extended, virtually everywhere in the global South, all across Western Asia, Arab governments in Europe, all across Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and including apparently in Russia. We don't know what came of it ultimately, but those contacts were clearly revealed.
We'll have more with Craig after a break. So, Craig, let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein and the Abraham Accords, because Epstein died in his jail cell in 2019, which is before the UAE, Morocco, and Bahrain officially normalized ties with Israel. But new documents reveal that there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes early on, especially through his contact with an Emirati port magnate, that's Sultan bin Sulayem. Now, we talked about Epstein as this connector. Can we say now that this connection with Sulayem helped pave the way for Israel and UAE normalizing relation?
I think it's unquestionable. Epstein was a key actor in creating the template for the so-called Abraham Accords, and the laboratory was the UAE. You know, these Abraham Accords, for viewers who don't know, these are effectively a U.S.-Israeli scheme to basically erase Palestinian rights from the Middle East equation and to normalize the Israeli regime through business and other kind of connections. Even as the Israeli regime is perpetrating illegal occupation, apartheid, and genocide with impunity. And based on these newly leaked documents, we know that Epstein spent years acting as an intermediary, cultivating business and security ties between Israel and the UAE. That was the blueprint years before the Abraham Accords were officially signed. He brokered high-level meetings between Israeli officials and Emirati business leaders, facilitating technology deals, leveraging his network to advance Israeli interest across the Middle East. But most important, as you mentioned, he brokered meetings between Ehud Barak and Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, who was the CEO of this Dubai-based DP World, a global logistics and ports management company.
It's a huge company.
And the emails show a very close personal relationship between Epstein and bin Sulayem. I mean, the two were sharing dirty jokes and porn images and personal information about themselves. And Epstein worked to facilitate investments by Sulayem in Israeli logistics infrastructure. He promoted Israeli cyber weapons and surveillance tech for use in Emirati-controlled, infrastructure and port security. And we know that bin Sulayem visited Epstein's private island, and then a neighboring island was actually purchased under his name. So in this way, Epstein helped to build the covert foundations for commercial and intelligence cooperation that later became the Abraham Accords. And all of that for the purpose of strengthening Israel's position and weakening the Palestinian cause.
Yeah, it's just worth reminding people, all of this was happening after 2008, after he became a registered sex offender. Have you seen this photograph that's emerged of Sulayem and Epstein inspecting a piece of the kiswa? That's the black silk cloth that covers the Kaaba in Mecca. I mean, this is a sacred artifact sent to the United States. In this part of the world, it's certainly sparking outrage.
Absolutely, as it should.
Yeah. So there's been a very productive relationship. In December 2025, the UAE signed a $2.3 billion defense deal with Elbit Systems, which is one of the largest arms sales in Israeli history. So, this is the fruit of all of that effort. Craig, this Epstein story is clearly not going away, despite the very concerted efforts of the Trump administration and its allies. The outrage is real and it's sustained, which is rare these days. One reason, I think, is because these files show that the rules don't apply to everyone. And that's the feeling that's been building in political movements on both the left and the right, especially in the wake of Israel's war on Gaza. Do you see the connection there? Does Israel's genocidal assault on the Palestinians make more sense now that we've peeled back the curtain with some of these Epstein files?
Absolutely. We're living in a period where we're seeing serial aggression, which is supposed to be the crime of crimes by both the U.S. and the Israeli regime, the imposition of unlawful sanctions on countries and individuals, the murder and destruction of boats in the Caribbean, the invasion of Venezuela, the abduction of its leader, an ongoing live stream genocide in Palestine for more than 2 years, the open complicity of other states across Europe and Western Asia. And ultimately this unlawful Security Council Resolution 2803, setting up, Trump's Board of Peace, that I have said represents the final surrender of the international system to the abusive power of the U.S.-Israel axis. And I think unless there is a dramatic turnaround, and soon, this will be the beginning of the end for things like the UN and international law, which, by the way, is a goal that has long been sought by the Israeli regime. And now in a world defined by brute force, impunity, cowardice, complicity, it appears it's getting its wish. And you talk about the outrage, Kevin, that people are feeling. One of the things that we're seeing in the West is that Western media corporations are now trying to manage this, right? They have a history of running cover for Israel. they're now doing kind of damage control around Epstein. They're scrambling to manage what is the public understanding of the Epstein files.
Can you say more about that? I mean, the system revealed by the Epstein files is going to fight to preserve itself. How do you see that playing out?
I mean, it's quite visible and I think quite outrageous if you watch some Western media these days. What we know from the evidence, what the facts present, is the systematic corruption of U.S., U.K., and other governments, media, social media, and businesses by proxies of this foreign regime, Israel. But what the Western media has been doing is they've been framing the story. First, they tried to frame it as a scandalous tale of a wealthy sexual pervert, financier and pedophile, and some of his rich and powerful friends. But then, as more political details started to emerge about the role that he was playing, they tried to shift, and this now familiar narrative, blame the Russians, even though there is nothing to suggest in the Epstein files that he was principally concerned with Russian interests. Rather, what we know for certain was that Jeffrey Epstein was a very committed Zionist. By the way, these things even reveal that he was a Jewish supremacist, as made clear by a number of racist exchanges in the emails, but that his principal cause was that of the Israeli regime. And in fact, beyond his own, undeniable arrogance and bigotry and ego and hedonism, right? What all the documents reveal is that the money, the weapons, the security tech, the spying, the sex, the pedophilia, Epstein's extensive network, his horrific abuse of women and girls, and all the people that fell into his web, they were all essentially commodities to him, traded for the advantage of one single cause, which is Israel. That was the motive. And we know he had, extensive high-level connections to the Israeli regime, to its government, to security, intelligence, its financing circles, its business community. That was the means that went with the motive. So this is not some story of a lone sex offender or a new Russiagate, as Western media corporations are trying to convince us. It's a story about Israeli influence in the highest corridors of power and wealth.
Yeah, no, that's why this latest drop it feels different, because there are really two stories happening simultaneously. There's obviously the depraved trafficking of underage girls, which, but what this latest drop shows is the absolute rot at the heart of elite institutions. You've watched it up close. You've seen the decay. You were talking earlier that in the 1980s, the UN would stand up for things, and then it just stopped after Oslo. Does it feel like the international order has been destroyed, or did it commit suicide?
Well, I think there was plenty of internal complicity in its own destruction. But there have been powerful forces operating for many years. And interestingly, where we saw those most visibly was in successive U.S. governments that were always trying to weaken, contain, obstruct the United Nations in its activities around peace and security. We see it with the U.S. veto repeatedly, right? But also around human rights, about global development and so on. The U.S. always used the United Nations as a tool when it was useful to it, but obstructed it when it didn't like any of its purposes. It was never committed to a kind of universal normative mission of the UN, and has always been committed to might makes right. What we see with the Trump administration is they sort of stripped away all of the smoke and mirrors and are just openly imperial, colonial as well. Israel is the other force that has for years tried to weaken the United Nations, tried to carve out exceptions to international law. And, there was a period of time when other member states of the UN stood up to try to make sure that erosion didn't continue so openly. We are now in a period of unparalleled complicity, where we see country after country, region after region, effectively bowing down to the empire. And as I said, the pinnacle of that was the adoption of Security Council 2803, which erased 80 years of international law, of international resolutions, of the rights of the Palestinian people, and as if we are operating in colonial times, handed the survivors of a genocide in Gaza over to one of the perpetrators with the intimate involvement of the other perpetrator, which is to say that the survivors of Gaza, their future, their human rights are now in the hands of the US and Israel, which have dedicated themselves to the destruction of the Palestinian people. And the world, including the Security Council, including Europe, including countries of Western Asia, have gone along with this. First, in complicit silence, and now with an affirmative act in the Security Council of mandating 19th century colonialism in the 21st century.
All right. I think we could leave it there. Craig, thank you for coming on The Take today.
Kevin, thank you for having me.
In the heart of the dust where the olive trees weep, a story of courage, a promise to keep. The whispers of children, a song on the breeze, a prayer for the morning, for a moment of ease. The rubble-strewn streets, a canvas of grey, but the spirit of Palestine will not fade away. From the camps of Rafah to Jenin's strong stand, we see your resilience, we're holding your hand. We are here for Gaza, our world standing tall. We are here for Palestine, we'll answer your call. From the mountains we shout it, from the shores of the sea, for the land and its people, for the right to be free. We are here for Gaza, our voices will rise, a symphony of hope underneath weary skies. We are here for Palestine, with every beat of our heart. Until justice prevails, we will not stand apart. The headlines may flicker, the world looks away, but the truth of your struggle is brighter than day. The fisherman's prayer on a sea turned to red, the baker who shares his last portion of bread, the medic who races through alleys of fear, wiping away a lone terrified tear. These aren't just stories, they're letters of light, a testament to your unwavering fight. We are here for Gaza, a world standing tall. We are here for Palestine, we'll answer your call. From the mountains we shout it, from the shores of the sea, for the land and its people, for the right to be free. We are here for Gaza, our voices will rise, a symphony of hope underneath weary skies. We are here for Palestine, with every beat of our heart. Until justice prevails, we will not stand apart. They can build up their walls, they can rain down their fire, but they can't break the will or the burning desire for a home where the laughter of children can ring, for the songs of the free that the future will bring, for every displaced soul, for every life that's been lost. We will carry your memory, whatever the cost. We are here for Gaza, a world standing tall. We are here for Palestine, we'll answer your call. From the mountains we shout it, from the shores of the sea, for the land and its people, for the right to be free. We are here for Gaza, our voices will rise, a symphony of hope underneath weary skies. We are here for Palestine, with every beat of our heart. Until justice prevails, we will not stand apart. We are here for Gaza. We are here for Palestine. We are here till you are free.
You are an 88-year-old survivor of the Holocaust from Hungary. Do you believe what's happening in Gaza is a genocide?
Don't talk with anyone who doubts it.
Your father was sent to a concentration camp.
My family lost 15 members to Auschwitz.
How did you come across the issue of Palestine?
As a result of my visit to Israel, to my horror, I found that every member of my family, they were all racist by then.
Towards Arab.
Yes.
What is it like to be a Jewish Holocaust survivor who is accused, I'm sure you are, of being anti-Semitic?
In 1944, what I saw then was a byproduct of two armies fighting. And what I see in Gaza is deliberate destruction. It's even worse.
What would you say to someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, who says, I'm fighting on behalf of all Jews? For more than 2 years now, supporters of Israel have insisted that calling what's happening in Gaza a genocide is a modern-day blood libel against Jewish people. To accuse Jews, the victims of the greatest genocide of all time, of perpetrating a genocide against others, well, that's offensive. That's anti-Semitic, they say. Well, is it? The consensus of genocide scholars is that it is a genocide. But who better to ask about the genocide in Gaza? Not a genocide scholar, but an actual Holocaust survivor. Joining me now is 88-year-old Stephen Kaposh. Stephen, thanks so much for coming on Zateo.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
So you are an 88-year-old survivor of the Holocaust from Hungary, and you have been speaking out against what's happening in Gaza for over 2 years now here in the UK. You've become a very well-known activist at demonstrations, on the media.
Yeah.
Do you believe what's happening in Gaza is a genocide?
Absolutely. In fact, I think it is so obvious that I really don't talk with anyone who doubts it, because it's an absolute red line. It's so obvious.
You see people who deny the Gaza genocide akin to Holocaust deniers. You don't engage with them. They're deniers.
Yes, correct. We have a small group, the Holocaust Survivor and Descendants Against the Genocide in Gaza. It's a long title, but it does explain what's on.
It's an important name, I think.
Yes. And we, as you probably know, we stand by the side of the big marches, and we have extremely warm reception invariably. People are sometimes quite moved by the fact.
That's strange. I was told all these marches are anti-Semitic.
Well, that's exactly what we are doing, denying by being there and give a lie to this claim, which is absurd. Both that these marches are no-go areas for Jews, or that these are hate marches. And we are sort of proof against it, if you like.
You're there not just as Jewish protesters against genocide, you're there as Holocaust survivors protesting against genocide, which is obviously a pretty unique and sad position to have to be in. Let's just, for the sake of our viewers who don't know about you, Stephen, you, I believe, were 7 years old when the World War II reached your hometown of Budapest. You were forced to go into hiding.
That's correct.
You were separated from your mother. Your father was sent to a concentration camp. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, about enduring the Holocaust. What happened to your parents? What happened to you?
Yes. In about October 1944, the Hungarian semi-fascist autocratic ruler, Admiral Horthy, made a declaration that Hungary was leaving the German alliance. He made that from his palace in the Buda Hills, and was pretty quickly arrested by the Germans as a result. The Germans came in March 44, invading their ally. On the face of it, Hungary was an ally of Germany. And from the declaration date onwards, the out-and-out fascist party, the Arrow Cross Party, took power, and they were allied with or organized marauding groups, armed groups, which were actually hunting Jews. So suddenly, from that date onwards, the jeopardy was much greater for the Budapest Jews.
Do you remember that period yourself, personally?
Yes, I do remember, because it was on that day, on the day of declaration, that I was taken up into these protected homes. I mean, inverted commas, protected. And we had to go past a German checkpoint. And the German field guns were trained on the palace as we were going past. I was being carried. I was too small enough to be carried, and the person who was sent down from the homes to take me up had some magical pass which he just flashed to the German crew checkpoint, the soldiers who manned it, and they just stood to attention and waved us on. I don't know what was in that pass, but I kind of fantasized that probably it carried Hitler's signature or something, because that was all. They had one side of it, and we were waved on. And so from that point on, I was in hiding.
But not with your parents?
Not with my parents. My mother was in charge of a group of girls, and my aunt was in charge of a group of boys that I was attached to. And we were all on false papers and were supposed to have been refugees from the advancing Soviet troops on the Eastern Front, and obviously Aryan. And so some of us were meant to be war orphans. Anyway, everybody on false papers and false names. And my aunt, who was in charge, we were not allowed to recognize the family ties, for example, as a security.
But you and your parents, you survived the Holocaust. Your parents survived the Holocaust also.
Yes.
Even though your father was sent to account, he was one of the lucky ones.
Yeah. Well, yes, he was part of the Kastner project. Okay. That's how I got to Belsen. And the idea was that those transports, who were organized by Kastner with a deal with the SS, were to be eventually allowed to go to Switzerland from Belsen. And the previous group did that, in fact. But the whole deal, where Himmler himself was involved, was behind Hitler's backs.
Okay.
And when he discovered it, he stopped the whole thing. And in fact, Himmler was very nearly arrested at that time.
So you say as a child you remember that period. It obviously influenced the way you grew up, influenced your entire worldview. I do wonder, how has your childhood influenced the way you view the genocide in Gaza today? Do you find that your own experience as a child enduring a genocide has made you identify more closely maybe with the children in Gaza? What do you make of what you've seen over the past 2 years?
Liking this video? Then don't just watch, hit like, share and subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism.
Well, yes. I mean, there has been othering and discrimination even before that critical date. For example, we all had, from a certain date on, we all had to wear the yellow star.
Yeah.
And I had to wear a yellow star, despite my young age. And I do remember that. Most of my experience at the time was rather mild, because I was too young to understand the implications and the dangers. It was in retrospect that I sort of realized how awful everything was and how dangerous everything was. And of course, knowing that my family lost 15 members to Auschwitz. And that was an impact on me more than what I actually personally experienced. That was just, of course, part of it, if you like.
So how did you come across the issue of Palestine? How long have you been involved in Palestine actively?
Well, I think
you're 88 years young right now.
Yeah.
How long have you been involved in the struggle for Palestinian liberation as a supporter?
Well, first, I became, without sort of putting necessarily an active label on it, anti-Zionist as a result of my visit to Israel to visit my family. Some members of my family, in circuitous ways through Romania, ended up.
What year was that you went to visit?
That was before the 67 war, quite early. And I was completely shocked at what I found there. And I think that was a critical influence on me. Because to my horror, I found that every member of my family, and a number of aunts and cousins, etc., they were all racist by then.
Towards Arabs.
Yes, as they call them, not Palestinians.
Indeed.
And that really both horrified me, and I couldn't understand how it could happen. I now understand more about the impact of drip propaganda,
Yeah.
and also the kind of completely artificial fear that was created in them, that somehow they bought into the idea that unless they forcefully keep down the Arabs, they would be driven into the sea and the existential danger, which I am convinced was a complete lie.
Yes. You go there before the 67 war, before the occupation of West Bank and Gaza. Did you ever imagine at the time that one day you, Stephen Kaposh, former young child living through the Holocaust, would be at protests against Israel, saying the world's only Jewish state is now guilty of a genocide?
No, I wasn't aware of it at the time at all. In fact, around that time, I wasn't particularly active in any way in politics because having come after the 1956 uprising in Budapest, where I was actively involved in the demonstrations, and actually the uprising the day before really started at my university. But I have been through so many political upheavals and changes that when I got to the UK in '56, I decided to concentrate on my profession rather than...
So how do you rediscover Palestine and activism? Is it more recently, in the last 10, 15
Well,
years?
I think the critical experience was first the false anti-Semitism campaign inside the Labour Party.
Okay, so the Jeremy Corbyn period.
That's right. When I was horrified by the complete cynicism and I think deliberate lies that surrounded that campaign, using a false accusation of anti-Semitism against the left.
Yes.
And Jeremy Corbyn personally, but also his...
And which has now continued into a general attack on pro-Palestine activists as being anti-Semitic.
Yes. But that was the beginning of...
Interesting.
Of my...
Were you a member of the Labour Party?
Yes.
Are you still a member of the Labour Party?
No. This links to how I became active in the Palestine thing, because I resigned from the Labour Party when, having been asked by a left socialist group, SLN, to address them about the Holocaust on Holocaust Memorial Day about 3 years ago. And I said, yes, of course, I will, because there are very few witnesses left.
Yes.
And yes, I will talk to. They put out my name as being on a panel advertising it. And I immediately got a letter from the regional office of the Labour Party saying that, putting me on notice that if I go ahead with that engagement, I would be in disciplinary investigations would start up against me. And I interpret that, knowing how those sort of things went in those days, as being thrown out.
Yes.
That there could be no other outcome.
So you quit?
I immediately resigned with a letter, and that letter went viral because I ended the letter saying that maybe these techniques of false accusation of anti-Semitism, etc., will work electorally in the short term. In the long term, it will be a matter of shame for the Labour Party.
Well said.
That it had to be the Labour Party who imported McCarthyism into this country.
Well said. I like the idea
and that went pretty viral.
I like the idea that an 85-year-old knows how to go viral.
Yes.
That's impressive.
Well, I didn't know. It was just
happened. No, I'm sure you do. Let me ask you this. What is it like to be a Jewish Holocaust survivor who is accused, I'm sure you are, of being anti-Semitic? I'm sure there are other Jewish people in the UK who say you're a self-hating Jew. You know, Jews who oppose what Israel are doing, often demonized, smeared as self-hating. What is it like for you as someone who literally survived the Holocaust to be accused of that?
Well, I don't take any notice of it, to be honest. And the worst that I had was when I was speaking at a Camden meeting. While I was speaking, there was an anti-demonstration by Zionists, and somebody wrapped in the Israeli flag perched above me was calling me capo, capo repeatedly. Wow. I didn't hear it because I was speaking, but other colleagues immediately reported this to the police who were present, and this guy was arrested.
It's interesting you mentioned the police, because I believe the Met Police here in London brought you and 8 others in for questioning after you laid flowers at Trafalgar Square as part of a peaceful protest for Gaza. What did they bring you in for? What did they say you'd done wrong?
Well, this was a day when the police acted completely differently from normal. We kind of, I think it's fairly safely assume, because of suggestions from above, from higher circles.
But what did they say to you that you'd done wrong?
The claim was the same as against Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, who were on either side of me in that particular demonstration. The claim was that we went against a police order for the day, which was to remain static instead of marching. The original idea was to march towards the BBC to protest against their distorted coverage. Yes, and the police banned this in the last minute and said, no, you can't march. You got to be static at Whitehall.
And they took in an 88-year-old Holocaust survivor. What do you make of all these police rounding up of hundreds of Palestine Action protesters, little old ladies, grandmothers, priests, people in wheelchairs, blind people, a Labour government sending the police to do this? Did you ever think you'd see that in your lifetime as a survivor of fascism?
No, that's absolutely amazing. It's an own goal, actually.
Yes.
And I am amazed at the capacity of the government to create own goals one after the other. They will never give up. It is going to be, there already was some 2,000 people in total have been so arrested, and it will continue, and it will, it's unmanageable.
It's very authoritarian.
Yes. Well, that's one of my themes, actually, that as a conclusion from what I witnessed and so on, that fascism develops in stages, and it doesn't drop out of the sky.
Yeah.
And I think we are kind of dangerously on the way to various fascistic qualities, and we have to resist that.
Yes, we do. On that note, when people say, for example, Donald Trump in the United States, what he is doing resembles what Germany looks like in the 1920s, 1930s. Absolutely. Is that a fair comparison?
Absolutely. And also, I am very active to repeatedly try and break the taboo against comparison with the Israeli actions with the Nazi actions.
So the IHRA definition, as you know, of anti-Semitism,
that's a catastrophe.
Very controversial definition of anti-Semitism, says comparing Israel's actions to the Nazis is a form of anti-Semitism. You reject that?
Absolutely. It's a taboo which must be broken as often as possible.
Do you think Israel's actions in Gaza are comparable to the Nazis?
Yes, I think so. In quality, not in quantity, because we are not yet in,
thankfully,
and hope never will be, in the millions.
Well, Israeli soldiers are on record telling the Israeli newspapers, "I felt like a Nazi in Gaza." One of them told an Israeli newspaper.
One of the comparisons I have is in 1944, the winter of 1944, we were not only in hiding from October to liberation, but also in double jeopardy, because it so happens that where the homes were was where the epicenter of the final fight between the German army and the Soviets was played out. And the front line moved through us. And we had to relocate several times in double jeopardy.
Okay.
Sometimes they were shot at
Yeah.
because they couldn't distinguish between groups of
course.
dots in the snowfields or
Yeah.
what. And so when it was over and we finally came out of all that and looked around, because this is not typically
Yeah.
was the greatest area of destruction, because it was the final fight. Because Budapest generally wasn't so destroyed, just
Yeah.
in pockets. But just there, it was absolutely horrendous, with the royal castle burnt out,
Okay.
piles of rubble and glass and burnt out tanks and dead horses and dead soldiers and abandoned ammunition. Looked just like Gaza in certain shots.
So you're reminded
with
of
the difference I keep pointing out, that what I saw then was a byproduct of two armies fighting. And what I see in Gaza is deliberate destruction. It's even worse.
Wow. There are a lot of people who will hear you say that and be outraged. A lot of Jewish people will say it is anti-Semitic. They will say it's over the top. You obviously have the privilege. It's a horrible privilege to have. I shouldn't use the word privilege. You have the horrible right to speak on this as a Holocaust survivor. You can say certain things that other people can't say by virtue of the fact that you did survive the Holocaust. But let me ask you this. What do you make of the battles within the Jewish community over this issue? I know you sometimes go to protests with your daughter and your granddaughter. Do you see a generational change amongst British Jews when it comes to Israel and attitudes to Israel?
Yes, I think it's growing. And I protest against, and we all protest, left-wing Jews, protest against the Board of Deputies and the JLM. And
these are British Jewish communal organizations.
Claiming that they speak for the Jewish community. There isn't a homogeneous Jewish community. There are Zionist groups, and there are completely different socialist left-wing Jews. And they, the Board of Deputies, don't speak for the whole community. It's a myth that there is a so-called Jewish community. There are several communities.
But you would accept you're a minority within the British Jewish community.
Well, I'm not so sure about that.
Interesting.
Actually, I'm sure others have done research, etc. But in the circles where I move, the left-wing view is dominant. There are those Jews who say always with the oppressed, never with the oppressor. And there are many who subscribe to that.
What would you say to someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, who says, I'm fighting on behalf of all Jews?
It's a propaganda claim. It's false, completely false. I heard him speak in a snippet at Yad Vashem when he said, never again is now, with a reference to use again the Holocaust for a cover for a basis for the impunity that they seem to have or claim. And for us, never again has a completely different meaning. The left Jews, we think that the conclusion from never again is that this kind of horror of the Holocaust should not be ever visited to any other nation or faith or group or ethnicity.
And it has been done to Gaza by Israel.
And yes.
Stephen Kaposh, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to zeteo.com. Your support matters.
Well, that's our program. As always, thank you for watching. I'm Mark Hage. This is the Vermont Report on Palestine, Israel. And until our next show, take good care.